Sutra, action, law, normalcy. It is better to be normal than to be right. The desire to please and cater to everyone often leads us away from our own happiness. We often view people through the eyes of the cat from Shrek in an attempt to evoke sympathy and possibly gain approval. It appears endearing, but by fearing disapproval from someone important, we miss the chance to pursue our own course of action. This important person is not necessarily a specific individual. Society as a whole has created an incredible number of norms and stereotypes throughout its long history. A decent person wouldn't act like that, we often tell ourselves. But this is an attempt by the individual to monitor themselves through society's eyes. Some call this conscience, others call it correctness. It can be named anything, but the key thing to remember is our own mental health. In this way, turning external evaluations into an internal voice, society dictates its morality to us. If you want to join a particular group, layer, or caste, you must behave as a proper person according to their view. However, no one explains to the candidate what exactly is considered proper in their circle. These voices, that is, voluntarily adhering to others' rules, severely limit personal freedom and the ability to realize one's desires. Freedom is the ability to want what you truly want. Living in accordance with the laws and norms of society is important, that is indisputable. But it should not be more important than our own interests. Correctness represents certain social constraints imposed upon us. Society forces us to adhere to numerous prescriptions. Moreover, it is set up so that a person places themselves within these constraints. But in reality, it is better to be normal, i.e., being adequate to oneself and the situation, than to be correct. A normal reaction and normal behavior are much better than trying to please everyone everywhere. Attempting to satisfy others and follow social dictates often leads to misjudging situations and taking erroneous actions. For example, a bus driver speeds up to avoid falling behind schedule, not realizing that they are risking people's lives. Yes, they only want to do what is right, but they fail to assess the risk of their overly literal adherence to rules. Any sudden obstacle on the road might cause an accident, or worse. It is better to be normal than correct. Correctness is a predefined model external to the current situation. Normalcy is the ability to be adequate to the current situation. If we choose otherwise, we dissolve our unique personality into the superego, into the superconsciousness, into what Eric Berne called the parent. According to the basics of transactional analysis described by Berne, there are 3 ego states within each of us: parent, child, and adult. The parent ego state contains attitudes and behaviors adopted from outside, primarily from parents. The child ego state contains all the impulses that naturally arise in a child. It also includes records of early childhood experiences, reactions, and positions regarding oneself and others. The adult ego state is oriented toward perceiving current reality and obtaining objective information. It is organized, well-adapted, resourceful, and acts by studying reality, assessing possibilities, and calculating calmly. So, isn't it better for us to act as the adult and take responsibility for our actions and decisions rather than following externally imposed standards? Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it is time to pause and reflect. Mark Twain. Be yourself, everyone else is already taken. Oscar Wilde. Society dictates a certain model of behavior to us. But does it have the right to do so? Society, through the voices of moralists, shouts from every corner that stealing is wrong, while in practice, everyone big and small steals. Children are taught not to lie in school, but society itself does not just lie, it has learned to target this lie, gathering information about us from messengers, navigators, purchase histories, and then presenting us with lies we are most likely to prefer. A normal person does not forget their own interests. In social philosophy, the concept of social norms began to be thoroughly researched following the work of the outstanding French sociologist and moral philosopher Émile Durkheim. He noted significant discrepancies between the dominant ideology of society, the ways individuals describe themselves, and their habitual behavior. What is considered moral and right from the perspective of ethical theory and even personal beliefs often proves to be a weak motivator for behavior, while things we might not want to admit even to ourselves turn out to be the actual norms of our actions. The desired and the actual frequently diverge in a person's behavior, and they sincerely do not notice this. Therefore, according to Durkheim, it is essential first to find evidence of widespread and repetitive behavior, rather than relying on common opinions about correct or approved behavior. Not only individuals but also societies are prone to self-deception. Durkheim recommended analyzing statistical data and noted spontaneous protective reactions of society when certain individual actions provoke almost instinctive, but entirely human, not animal, rejection and are perceived as extremely unacceptable. Such actions point to the true social norms. These are the ones violated by intolerant or even hated individuals. Everyone knows their name, but no one remembers their face. To be yourself in a world that is constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson. After Durkheim, the French tradition saw the flourishing of research into the realm of everyday life as a genuine social sphere, revealing the secrets that society and individuals tend to conceal. This includes studying normal social behavior as an expression of the characteristic mentality of a given society reflected in the Annales School, a historical movement founded by Lucien Febvre and Marc Bloch. The famous French and American philosopher of the late 20th century, Michel Foucault, explored social practices presented as cultural norms but not truly representative of what we consider culture. His work Discipline and Punish examines, among other things, the concept of norms in psychiatry and their significant historical changes, as well as societal views on the grounds for isolating individuals in special institutions. The concept of norms also exists in biology, where it refers to the limits of optimal functioning of a biological system. Physiology, the theoretical foundation of medicine that studies the normal healthy organism, introduces the concept of physiological norms, defining the boundaries of biological optimality in an organism's life. Normal functioning of an organism depends on the normal values of various indicators, and their range is quite narrow. Values outside these ranges are usually associated with pathology, which poses a threat to the organism's life. One must always struggle not to be crushed by the masses. If you try this, you will often be alone and sometimes afraid. But no price is too high for the privilege of owning yourself. Friedrich Nietzsche. Seek companions better than yourself, not worse. The same biological laws apply when studying human behavior in society and personal relationships. There are certain norms of behavior aimed at minimizing the energy expenditure for performing tasks. These norms do not always align with the concept of correctness. Correctness is not the only criterion people follow in decision-making and is often subjective. From a Christian perspective, a good illustration of this principle is an example from the life of the great ascetic Macarius of Egypt, 4th century. When the ascetic Macarius, having reached heights of spiritual life unimaginable for an ordinary person, was praying, a voice told him, "Macarius, you have not yet achieved the level of perfection in the virtuous life as two ordinary women living together in the nearby city. Receiving this revelation, the Venerable Macarius took his staff and went to that city. Finding the house where the mentioned women lived, Macarius knocked on the door. Immediately, one of the women came out to the knock and, seeing the Venerable One, welcomed him into her home with great joy. Calling both women, the Venerable One said, "For your sake, I undertook this great feat, coming here from the distant desert, for I wish to know your good deeds and ask you to tell me about them without hiding anything." The women replied, "Believe us, Honorable Father, what virtues do you wish to find in us? We shared our bed with our husbands just last night." But the Venerable One insisted on hearing about their way of life. Then, convinced by him, the women said, "We were not related to each other before, but then we married two brothers, and for 15 years we have lived together in one house. Throughout our time together, we have never spoken a single malicious or bad word to each other and have never quarreled." As we see, the normal, i.e., adhering to human communal norms, ordinary life of these women was more salvific for their souls before God than the heroic, self-sacrificial life of Macarius. Always be a first-rate version of yourself, instead of a second-rate version of someone else. Judy Garland. You become like those you associate with. Just be yourself, there's no one better. Taylor Swift. Islam also approaches extreme manifestations of rule following with caution. One hadith reports that when Prophet Muhammad learned of his followers' excessive practices in religious rites, such as restrictions in eating, sleeping, and vows of celibacy, he emphasized the principle of moderation, or wasatiyya, in fulfilling religious obligations. Among the obligatory practices, the Prophet mentioned fasting, 5 daily prayers, time for rest, and marriage. However, for instance, during a military campaign or a difficult journey, a believer is exempt from fasting. In Islam, moderation is associated with concepts such as justice, tolerance, and forbearance, which guard Muslims from extremes and rigid views. Moderate views protect the religious community from disagreements and turmoil fitna and maintain the necessary unity in diversity of opinions. A Muslim should practice religious rites with moderation and not overindulge, as this could shift priorities, leading to perfectionism in secondary matters while neglecting the essential and obligatory. It is impossible to be perfect and correct in everything. For a believer, it is important to sincerely adhere to religious prescriptions in accordance with one's own norm at a given time. This will be true for the believer and will be rewarded by the Almighty. The middle way is one of the names of Buddha's teaching. Its value lies primarily in its methodological message, to avoid extremes and seek a middle solution to each problem, focusing on the criterion of optimal practical effectiveness. In its classical formulation, the middle way is opposed to extremes hedonism and asceticism. There are, O brothers, 2 extremes that the renunciant should avoid, says the Mahavagga. What are these 2 extremes? One extreme involves a life immersed in desires, connected with worldly pleasures. This life is low, dark, ordinary, unwholesome, and useless. The other extreme involves a life of self-torment. This life, filled with suffering, is unwholesome and useless. Avoiding these 2 extremes, the Tathagata during enlightenment realized the middle way, the path conducive to insight, understanding, leading to peace, higher knowledge, enlightenment, and nirvana. One bad example has more effect than hundreds of strict rules. From a Judaic perspective, the concept of normalcy in the spiritual realm is defined by the presence of positive inner qualities as a sign of spiritual health. Shmana Prakim, Chapter 4. In child rearing, according to the renowned Kabbalist M. Letman, it is essential to follow the principle of the golden mean. If I confine my child within very strict limits, put a yoke on him, place him in traces, and only show him how to act in this way, I do not allow him to develop. He grows up as a very limited person, doing only what is required of him, and does not care about anything else. Let everyone leave him alone. If I leave him in a vacuum, without giving him any guidelines, he becomes even more unhappy because he is searching for what to do. In this case, he is influenced by internal explosions and deep pressures, which manifest in undesirable actions and consequences at any age. Therefore, both extremes are absolutely unacceptable. There must be a middle way, where I give the child proper guidelines, explain things, and provide examples. He sees his parents as examples of what we expect from him. Moreover, in a well-structured society, this example is shown not only by parents but also by others, neighbors, relatives, school, peers. Therefore, he inevitably tries to embody what he sees around him. The deepest problems of modern life arise from the claims of the individual to preserve the autonomy and individuality of his own existence in the face of the overwhelming forces of society, historical legacy, external culture, and the techniques of life. George Simmel. George Simmel. Can it be said that correctness, the desire to meet ideal standards, brings joy and satisfaction to a person? Is correctness, the aspiration to live and act flawlessly, a healthy driving force, or can it lead to self-destruction? Being correct in everything has both positive and negative aspects, writes psychology professor Adrian Fernham. People who strive to do everything perfectly, according to the rules, highly value perfection. In some areas, following all the rules is indeed important, such as in science or sports. The accuracy and conscientiousness of a doctor are essential components of his profession and are considered the norm. Correct people are often very well organized. However, correctness often becomes all-consuming. Such individuals not only impose numerous demands on themselves but also, in roles such as parent, teacher, or spouse, try to make others adhere to the same strict rules and requirements. Undoubtedly, these meticulous perfectionists can achieve excellent results. But there is also a darker side to idealism. Correct individuals are very sensitive to mistakes and shortcomings. They believe that they are loved and valued because they do everything right. They are unfamiliar with the words normal or not bad. Everything must be flawless, i.e., perfect. Psychologists often view the problem of correctness as a deficiency, sometimes leading to mental disorders. Correct natures are prone to stress, depression, chronic fear of making mistakes, indecisiveness, and shame about themselves and others. Perfectionists evaluate everyone around them through the lens of ideal rules. They impose their standards and expect others to fully comply. Clinical psychologist Peg O'Connor of the University of Massachusetts believes that perfectionists develop an excessive sense of outrage at everything that happens. They constantly criticize not only themselves but also those around them. They cannot understand that it is impossible to do everything perfectly and according to all the rules in this world. This perpetual dissatisfaction with everything and everyone, including themselves, corners them. They find it difficult to be happy and productive, and it is hard for them to develop a high self-esteem. They are driven by a constant fear of failure and defeat. If an ordinary person, who is not an idealist, makes a mistake, they can view it positively, see it as experience, and use it constructively. But if a mistake happens with an idealist, the feelings of guilt and remorse become unbearable. It is even worse if someone from their circle makes a mistake. According to their opinion or in reality, they are unlikely to forgive that person and, if possible, will punish them severely. Naturally, such lovers of flawlessness and ideality find it hard to connect with the world around them, as they struggle to come to terms with themselves. It is very difficult to find allies while constantly criticizing and being outraged by what they do. Being a correct person is very challenging, as these individuals suffer from both their surroundings and themselves. By setting unrealistic goals and demanding the same from others, they can never achieve them and are unable to feel happy. As you behave, so will you be judged. Desiring to be someone else is the loss of yourself. Kurt Cobain. An example is better than a rule. There is nothing wrong with living by rules and setting high standards for oneself, but they should be achievable. The secret lies in feeling good while doing so, like a normal person, not a Superman or a robot. Certainly, with the advent of social media, norms of mental health have changed, but the splitting and further multiplying of personalities is still considered schizophrenia by doctors, especially when the patient does not know which personality is their own. We are reminded of this each time we mimic a popular image in pursuit of likes or the desire to join a useful group. This can end sadly. A person lives in society and can be dependent on it. There is nothing wrong with this. But social norms should not become shackles. We do what is right when it benefits us and those around us. But if it is bad for us, or bad for those around us, norms can and should be disregarded. Norms are designed to make people feel good. If that is not the case, it is our right and duty to break the norms. Yes, we will cease to be people of rules. But we will gain something far more important: we will become normal people. Imperfection is beautiful, madness is genius, and it is better to be absolutely ridiculous than absolutely boring. Marilyn Monroe. Find out who you are and do it on purpose. Dolly Parton. There are no rules without exceptions.